As I film this video, I have been to 8 different countries across 3 different continents. At the age of 25, I have been to 3 different continents and I have experienced a lot of culture shock along the way. That said, of all the countries I've been to, all the continents I've been to, the places I've seen and experienced, the place that provided the most culture shock for me personally was actually the place that I am the most familiar with, which was the United States of America. I've never experienced the same degree of culture shock in any other country that I experienced upon returning to the US after living in the Netherlands for 14 months. Bearing that in mind, in this video, I'm going to be reacting to the Mountain Dispatch talking about some of the reverse culture shocks that she has experienced as a longtime American expat after moving back to the US, because I don't know what long-term means, but I'm going to assume it is a lot longer than 14 months. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video.
Today, I'd like to talk about my experience with reverse culture shock upon moving back to the United States after having lived abroad. So for those of you who are new to this channel, I have lived in 6 different countries, of course, one being my birth country, the United States.
So right off the bat, she definitely has a lot more travel experience than I do. I've technically only lived in 2 countries in terms of the technicalities, just the visas that I've had. Right now I'm on a tourist visa in Thailand, but I do plan on rotating between Southeastern Asian countries for the next 5 years or so. So I guess you can say that in around 5 years, I might have a similar level of experience as she has, but living in 6 different countries, that is honestly very, very admirable to me. Very admirable. That's something that I aspire to.
And also 5 other countries, 3 of which were in Europe and 2 of which were in Asia. What is reverse culture shock? The experience of readjusting to the culture and way of life of your home country after having spent an extended period of time living and traveling in other countries. So let's dive in. Here are the 13 ways where I experienced reverse culture shock upon moving back to the United States. And I have notes, so I will occasionally look down at them. Bear with me. The first, and these are in no particular order. The first point is that Americans feel rushed, stressed, and obsessed with work. This is something that is extremely hard to adjust to, particularly if you have just moved from a country with a slower, relaxed culture. And Japan, China, South Korea, and Singapore, they definitely are right on par with the American obsession with work and identifying with their work.
So I haven't traveled to any of those countries extensively. I literally went to Japan for all of a couple hours for a layover on the way here to Thailand, actually. So I can't really comment on the work culture in those places. I do know, however, that the schooling culture in those places is so deeply embedded within the psyches of the people there that even people who descend from those countries and grow up in the US are still held to those same standards of schooling. That's why at a lot of American schools, especially in affluent areas, you will see people from those countries along with India getting the valedictorian and salutatorian labels in schools. They're usually right there at the top of the class ranking system, is because it's so deeply embedded in the culture. So I can only imagine that that would also translate to the work culture. Whereas in Europe, of course, work-life balance takes precedence over all. Work-life balance is just as deeply embedded in the European psyche as that work culture is embedded in the Asian and American psyche.
However, the US takes the cake in the West. So here are some things that really rubbed me the wrong way upon moving back about a decade ago. The hustle culture, the grinding it out, that kind of stuff that mentality feels destructive. There's also that the constant talk of being productive. Even when we're not working, people are concerned about being productive, and it's a very odd mentality for anyone who's lived abroad or anyone who just maybe lives a slower, quieter life in the countryside. Another thing is that people are using words like optimize. They have to optimize everything in their life. I mean, whatever just happened to living. And
You definitely hear that word a lot in the entrepreneurial space. I'm not sure if that's just a US specific thing, but maybe it's because there are more entrepreneurs in the US and from the US. And I say that as an entrepreneur myself. I mean, I'm filming 3 videos today, 12 videos this week. So when it comes to productivity, I guess this is the pot calling the kettle black, but I do feel like a lot of Americans overemphasize the importance of productivity without really taking into consideration why they're trying to be so productive. Because ultimately, the primary reason why you want to be productive is so that you can secure the freedom to do the things you enjoy. And if that's the case, then maybe you should simply choose to live a balanced life along the way. That's something that I'm still coming to terms with, and I'm still trying to reconcile that with the demands of just being an adult, being an entrepreneur as an adult, and providing for myself, my girlfriend, etc. But I do admire that about European culture, is that they seem to see the long-term ramifications of having that optimization mentality, and they understand how destructive that path actually is.
then the other thing is hearing people talk about their 5 and 10-year plan is enough to make me laugh. It really is. I don't remember the exact quote, but
It's funny because I literally just mentioned my 5-year plan earlier in this video. So she's calling me out with this one.
something like, you know, life is what happens when you're busy making plans, or, you know, uh, make plans and, you know, God laughs, or something like that. So I've never had that mentality. I have never had a 5 or 10-year plan in my life. And some people could say that that's why you don't achieve so much or whatever in the conventional sense. However, I've always known, I've had a mental list of things that I would love to do in this lifetime. And it changes over time, but I've never actually had a plan. I just kind of pick one in my brain and move in that direction and then go from there. Now, Americans are just, they put work at the center of their lives.
So before we go any further, it's interesting because, again, I lived in the Netherlands for 14 months, so that's the European culture that I'm most familiar with. Dutch people are known for planning. They are known to prioritize planning. What I want to know, if you're Dutch watching this, is does this also apply to long-term plans, or is this more just 2-week plans or 4-week plans? Because it's kind of a whole thing where whenever you want to hang out with the Dutch person, you have to hit them up a few weeks in advance because they probably already have the next few weeks planned out. So let me know, if you're Dutch, if that also applies to that 5 to 10 year time horizon. Because for me, again, and I don't want to do a whole lot of talking because, as you can see, this video is pretty long, but I have a 5-year plan right now simply because not having a 5-year plan didn't really work out very well for me in the past. But again, to her point, you make plans and God, the universe, Allah, whatever you believe in, this thing, this force, it just laughs.
Identify with it, and that is not something I can relate to. It's actually very difficult. You know, I've found that there are a lot of people I know who, when you want to catch up with them, all they can talk about is work, and then they use all this lingo from work that anyone who doesn't work there doesn't understand. It's a very strange experience. So the next thing, politics. Number 2, politics in your face 24/7. Doesn't matter whether it's an election cycle or not. Politics is the new religion in America, and it's really depressing. Now, when I moved back from abroad,
I never heard anyone say it like that, but now that she mentions it, that's very true. Politics is the new religion. It's a tool that the people in power use to divide and conquer. Interesting.
it was 2015, and that is when politics were heating up in a way that we've never seen before, and it has only intensified ever since. You know, Everywhere you go, there are signs. People are wearing, political swag with, logos on them. The signs in people's yards, and then also all over the news, the papers, the magazines, and also bumper stickers. Americans are obsessed with bumper stickers and have to put their political ideologies all over their cars. I always wonder why people buy BMWs only to cover it in bumper stickers. It's beyond me. But anyway,
That's very true. I especially noticed this in the southern US when my girlfriend and I were traveling across the US during our van life journey a few months ago, was that in the South, it seems like conservatives especially are very, very adamant about putting bumper stickers on their car to express their political beliefs. And why they believe that other people care is beyond me. I don't care that you don't support abortion. You're objectively wrong. Different discussion for a different day, but that's definitely something that I never saw in Europe, ever, not even once.
hard to adjust to, especially because I simply just view politics and the two-party system as two wings of the same bird. They're all getting richer in the process, and we're not really getting much at all. So the third thing, small talk. For me, small talk is utterly painful. Now I realize that small talk is a way that people who don't know how to connect with another human being try to connect and just be pleasant. I get that. But I'm not interested. I'm kind of a very direct, no BS kind of person. And in the sense of not liking small talk, I resonate so much more. Sorry, there are mosquitoes. I resonate so much more with the Nordic cultures in that sense, because, when they speak, it's for practical reasons or there's meaning and depth to it.
I agree with her 100% on that. Now, of course, I'm a very, very big introvert, and I know I may not convey that through my content, but if you ever spend even just a day with me in real life, you will see very quickly that I am not a very social person at all. And that's by choice. It's because, to her point, I don't see the point in all of these pleasantries and the elevator talk. We're never going to see each other again. We're never going to see each other again. So what's the point of having this conversation and draining my social battery, which I can use for meaningful interactions, on, again, pleasantries, niceties, whatever you want to call them? Just doesn't make any sense to me. And I will say that's one of my favorite things about really every other place I visited. Every other place I've visited, Thailand, Japan, obviously living in the Netherlands, Belgium, the UK, people just minded their own business for the most part. And I really, really, really enjoyed that.
Now, for those who have ever been to America or who are from the US and have lived abroad, you'll notice that when you come home, how are you? How are you? I'm great. I'm good. I'm great. And people just ask you, how are you, as a greeting. And sometimes they're not even interested in the answer. And then if they do wait for an answer, they don't want a sincere answer. You're supposed to say, I'm great, I'm good, I'm well, how are you? And that's how it goes. That's basically how it goes. A simple hi and a smile, or just a smile, as long as it's sincere, is more my style. And it's hard to get used to a lot of the nonsensical small talk. So let's get into the fourth point that is related to small talk, and it's the other end of the spectrum, and it's oversharing. I'll never forget returning to the United States and being in line at the grocery store and having some lady talk to me about a coupon, and then that coupon topic, which was boring as all get out, and I would never talk to a stranger about coupons, turned into her telling me her life story and just like vomiting all of the details of her life onto me.
I experienced this as well. So look, I don't say this to put this person down. I can maybe speak more on this story in another video, because again, this video is already going to be pretty long. But one of the first times I went back to the gym in the US, I think it was around 2 a.m. So it was just me and the gym manager. Now, mind you, I don't even know why she was there, because that was during the unstaffed period. So I guess she was just there hanging out or whatever. I don't know. But basically, to make a long story short, I ended up finding out that this woman spent time in rehab because she didn't eat for 100 and something days. And the whole time, I'm just thinking to myself, I could be about halfway done with my workout by now. And look, I appreciate that she trusted me enough to tell me this, but at the same time, it's like, I'm not a therapist. I'm a 25-year-old person who has never experienced that myself. I don't know what to tell you about this. But I think the reason why this is the case is because the way American cities are designed, people, especially a place like Dallas, where I returned to in the US, because that's where I grew up, that's where my parents live and all of that, and where that interaction occurred. But in a place like Dallas, people aren't really getting that interaction as much as they would in a place like Europe. And because of that, on the rare occasion that they see someone and get the chance to talk to them, they kind of make up for lost time. I'm not a psychologist, again, I'm not a therapist. This is just my best guess as to why this occurs.
Me while we stood in this massive line at a grocery store, and I just thought to myself, welcome home. That is something that is not necessarily one of our most endearing traits as Americans, and even as time goes by, we are getting worse. We certainly don't understand boundaries and the separation between private and public. And so getting used to people vomiting up their life stories and just spewing at you as a stranger is never easy to adjust to for me, ever. I'm still not used to it, and I've been back a decade. So the next one is point number 5. It's really personal in the sense that not everyone has this experience. It's the people that you know. They can provide the greatest culture shock ever. Now, the people you know, when you return, they expect you to fall in line and behave as you used to behave, do all the things you used to do, and be interested in all the same things that you used to be interested in.
So I think I might have lucked out in this regard, in that, for starters, I have a very, very, very small social circle. I literally only saw 2 of my friends when I went back, and both of those friends are generally open-minded people. And that's why we're friends, is because we're growth-oriented people. So I didn't really have to experience people trying to put me in that box. And then my family members, a lot of them are well-traveled as well, or my mom and her side of the family, they come from the Philippines. So I didn't really have to experience that per se, but I can see how that would be a very, very annoying thing to deal with. Very annoying thing.
And having lived abroad, I can tell you that you inevitably change and that you are not always going to be interested in those same things or enjoy talking about the same things or doing those same things. So for me, people always wanted to go out to the bar. And there was a bar that we always used to go to, or at least they always used to go to. I would go to occasionally. And when I got back from living abroad, mostly I wasn't drinking anymore. I was drinking a little bit, a glass of wine or cider with a nice meal, but that's it. I was not really into drinking heavily. And now I don't drink, so it's even less so. But every time they wanted to do something, it was always about going to the bar. And I just wondered, why couldn't we go do something outdoors? Why couldn't we all, have a barbecue together? Why couldn't we go for a hike? Why couldn't we watch the sunset and then hang out there and have a picnic and, bring drinks with us? But why do we have to be at the bar? And people got quite, how should I say, not necessarily mad, but they didn't like that I was not interested in going to the bar. And
the reason why that happened is because those people, they had fixed mentalities. And that's the thing, when you have a growth mentality, you can't really put yourself around people with a fixed mentality, because you're going to remind them of all the potential they refuse to fulfill within themselves. So I think that's why, for me personally, I've always been very conscientious of the people I put around me, the people I invite into my space. It's because I don't want to have to deal with that.
They Some people just stopped calling me altogether when I would decline. I would often invite them to do other things, like the things that I suggested, and they would decline and never be interested. And then eventually those once friendships just kind of faded away. There were certainly some people who were interested in catching up and having a great time and doing whatever outdoors, getting in a canoe and going paddling or hiking or whatever. And that was awesome. And those people are still in my life because it was a shared experience that we have when we get together. It wasn't just about drinking and getting intoxicated. So I should mention that those are also the people who were interested in my experiences of living abroad. The other people wanted to pretend that I had never left, that I hadn't changed, and that nothing had ever changed. And it was very odd. And so letting them go was a natural experience. So the sixth one.
Again, growth mentality, fixed mentality. They are incompatible, plain and simple. Either the fixed mentality person has to develop a growth mentality or vice versa.
The size of everything, whether it be stores, homes, vehicles, portion sizes, clothes, and people. I'm sorry, folks, but this is not normal. The rest of the world is not on the McMansion size everything. And the gluttony and excess and resulting obesity epidemic that we have here in the US is astonishing. While obesity and excess and glutton certainly exist in many countries around the world, it's never to the point that we have here in the US. It's also hard to get used to seeing people who don't even look like humans anymore because they have polluted.
Jesus Christ. Well, she's definitely right. And again, I'm from Texas, so that's the area where I returned to along with my girlfriend. And we were coming from the Netherlands, which is a country that's known for small things. So you can just imagine the reverse culture shock even before we left the airport, looking through the window and seeing the parking garage and realizing that pretty much 90% of people were driving either full-size or mid-sized SUVs or pickup trucks. And you get in the car, you're on the highway, and the roads are just massive. Everything is big for no reason other than the fact that there's just a bunch of excess space. But what people don't understand is that just because there's excess space doesn't mean you have to fill it. Because trying to fill that excess space just for the sake of filling that excess space leads to excess waste. But I digress. Texas is probably the biggest culprit in this regard. Everyone wants a really big house with a really big yard, really big cars, for no reason at all. No reason. You don't need all that space. You can see the apartment we're in here in Thailand. It's around $420, $430 a month. And it's not big at all. The reason why I haven't done an apartment tour is because, boom, that's the whole apartment right there. You just saw it, basically. You have the bedroom and the bathroom that you haven't seen. This is all we need. We're two people. Why would we need a big house or a big mansion? Just doesn't make sense.
Themselves so much, and their bodies have become so distorted. I know that some people will take that offensively, and it is not made to be offensive because I feel sorry for all of us. It's not a good thing. Food. The food was shocking. When you live abroad, you realize that American food is heavily polluted and filled with toxins. Something as innocuous as, is normally innocuous, such as ketchup, for example, is not innocuous. In the US, instead of using a tiny bit of simple cane sugar, it is pumped full of high fructose corn syrup, which is banned in most countries. So
I actually didn't know that high fructose corn syrup was banned in a lot of countries. I mean, I'm not surprised that it is, but I didn't actually know that because I know a lot of American products have high fructose corn syrup in them, and I've probably consumed a fair amount of it in my lifetime. Thankfully, I'm making up for lost time, but that's definitely very concerning that America has such low standards, especially for a nation that's supposed to be amongst the most developed in the world. It has such low standards for food, which is aside from water and oxygen, the most important thing for human survival.
That is a perfect example as to how our bodies are becoming polluted. I also wanted to say that we just do weird things to food. We inject wax into our fruits and vegetables to make them look shinier and more appealing and as a preservative, which is gross. And, everyone thinks that apple peels are nutritious and healthy, and normally they are. But if you're not picking the apple off the tree and it's not organic and it's been sprayed with pesticides as well, it's not good for you. It is not good for you at all. So that is one of those hard things to get used to. Americans are obsessed with making things look more appealing for sale, but it has nothing to do with health. Now, so, for example,
And then the ironic thing is that for as low as the quality standards are for food in the US, they're so much more expensive than the equivalent products in Europe. It's so much more expensive to eat healthy in the US than it is to eat healthy in Europe. And I would say I'll never understand that, but I think I do. I think I understand why they make it that way. But different discussion for a different day.
I will never forget going to the grocery store and buying some pepperoncinis and the pickled ones in a jar. And I looked at the ingredients list, and it had, and I wrote this down, FD and C Yellow 5. I actually went to the store to find that same brand, and it turns out all of them have this in it. FD and C Yellow 5. I don't know what FD and C stands for, but why do we have to artificially color pepperoncinis? Are we little kids and things have to be bright and appealing for us to consume them? I don't get it. Is the original color bad enough? Overall, the food is horrendous. I'm sorry. We just have so many additives and so much junk. And even though I shop and eat the perimeter of a grocery store, I don't do the packaged foods in the middle. My digestive tract had a hard time adjusting, and it still is very unhappy. I'm not gonna.
I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but I'm just going to say it again. When I was in the Netherlands, I was consuming around 3,700 calories, 3,800 calories a day, and I was struggling to put on weight. In the US, I actually cut the calorie count back to 3,600 a day, and I still gained weight very quickly. Now, granted, I was actively trying to build muscle and bulk, so I guess you could say it was a good thing, but for most people who aren't into weightlifting or bodybuilding or whatever, that's not going to be a good thing. And part of this is the lifestyle, just cycling every single day. But I don't think cycling burns that many calories to offset the food. So I think what it really comes down to is that the body just has a much more difficult time digesting American food than it does European food. And that's a very broad statement to make. I'm generalizing quite a bit because, again, you can get healthy food in the US. The problem is it costs so much more money that for most Americans, it's simply not within the realm of feasibility.
Why? And then the weight gain that comes with it. Well, I'm not exactly overweight at all, but I noticed that, I gained an extra inch around the midsection moving back to the US, and that's just ridiculous because I would eat more living abroad and I would eat well and just stay the same size. Point number 8, taxes. And I'm not talking about tax returns, that's for another video, but I am talking about the price tags that you see on items in the store. In the majority of countries around the world, the price tag that you see on an item or below an item on a shelf is the price that you pay at the register. You don't show up to the register like you do in the US and then taxes added on top of that. So in the US, when I got back, I was totaling up what I had purchased in my head in terms of cost, and I would have the cash ready by the time I got to the register. And that was because I forgot about tax, and that
Honestly, this is crazy because growing up in the US, this is such a normal thing. But when you realize that pretty much no other country, at least no other country that I've been to, and evidently no other country that she's been to, does this, you realize it's actually kind of criminal. It's basically just false advertisement. It's just false advertisement. And I've heard all kinds of different excuses as to why this is the case. They're all bullshit. There is no reason why stores should be doing that at all. They need to outlaw that legitimately.
Tax had not been included in the price. And I would have to dig out more money, or I would hand them the money and they'd tell me it's not enough. And I would go, oh, and I would get out more money and hand it to them. So that was something hard to get used to. So driving. The majority of the US is, or has been constructed and is made for vehicles. It is not made for humans or cyclists, pedestrians or cyclists. It is made for vehicles. And sure, humans are driving those vehicles, but it certainly diminishes the quality of life. And for those of you who don't know, public transport in the United States, aside from a few cities, is absolutely abysmal. Even cities like New York and Boston, their subway systems are on their last legs, let's put it that way. They need immense amount of repairs.
I will say, and to her point, New York and Boston, as well as DC, those might be the three best public transit cities in the US, but you can tell that they're just dilapidated. The subway stations are dirty, and when I say dirty, it's almost like you can literally just see a layer of neglect just all over the place. New York especially is really, really bad about this. And look, I get it. It's probably expensive to maintain it, and it's better to have functional public transit, even if it's dirty, than to not have functional public transit. But they definitely need to do better about that. They need to do better. And again, we're holding America to a higher standard because of how America markets itself. Look, if you're going to say that you're the best country on the planet, then you have to live up to that expectation. Otherwise, don't call yourself that. That's all I'm asking for.
And are vulnerable to flooding, as we've recently seen in New York. And so not being able to walk everywhere or to cycle or to just, use public transport and get around is really frustrating, because it seems to me that this country was built for vehicles so that the auto industry, which started in the early 1900s here in the US, would forever be in business. That's my perspective. I'm sure there's some information on that somewhere, but I haven't looked. And
so I have a little bit of information about this. It's my understanding that at one point, America actually had a fairly robust public transit system, believe it or not. But the automotive companies and the oil companies came together and lobbied the politicians to tear all of that shit up and basically rebuild American cities in such a way that they were car dependent. And you especially see this in the newer American cities, such as, let's say, Dallas or Phoenix. Any city in the Sun Belt of the US, you're going to see this phenomenon. And I'm not going to lie, again, growing up, you just think it's normal to have to get in a car to go pretty much anywhere. But once you've been to Europe and seen how walkable it is in these places, not just one place, it's not like the Netherlands is an anomaly in this regard, but you can cycle and walk damn near everywhere I've been to in Europe. In fact, literally everywhere I've been to in Europe. When you experience that and then you go back to having to drive everywhere, I'm not gonna lie, it pisses you off, or at least it pissed me off.
And so that's why it's really depressing. I also think that that's why any attempts at high-speed rail have been useless. They've been seeped in corruption, and they never amount to anything. The closest thing we have to a national rail system is Amtrak, and it's not really that awesome. It used to be all right, but it is going the way of Greyhound buses. And if anyone knows about Greyhound buses are not you do not board those buses unless you are desperate, unless you have absolutely no other options. And that is because Greyhound buses, and I believe they got bought out, but I do know that they are still the same. I've had a former coworker have everything they own stolen from them other than their small backpack on Greyhound. But these are the most unsavory of people.
So I took a Greyhound bus along with my friend, one of my growth-oriented friends that I mentioned earlier, back in 2018, going from Dallas to LA and back, 30 hours each way. And while we did make very meaningful memories that we can always look back on and just enjoy in retrospect, it was pretty miserable. At the time, it was pretty miserable. You're surrounded by sketchy characters, and it's just not a good experience overall. And I also rode a similar bus. It was kind of a touring coach bus, whatever you want to call it, from the Netherlands to the UK. And that was a much better experience. Much, much better experience. The people on the bus were, well, normal people who didn't really seem like they had any ill intent. Didn't really see any sketchy characters. And the experience overall was just categorically better for about the same price. In fact, I think it was even cheaper when you account for the fact that we also got accommodation in our travel package. Granted, it wasn't as long of a drive, but the point is, I do feel like that experience, and I don't know exactly what this company was called, but that experience was way better than the Greyhound bus experience. I would never take a Greyhound bus, especially for that distance, ever again.
I mean, criminals and drug addicts and alcoholics are, and I have compassion for everyone, but you don't always want to be on the bus with people.
And another thing is sometimes places like LA who struggle with homelessness issues, what they'll do is they'll actually put homeless people, they'll buy their bus tickets, they'll put them on the Greyhound bus and bus them to other cities. That's literally a thing that they do. And again, you just see a lot of sketchy people. Not to say that all homeless people are sketchy, but you just see a lot of questionable characters on those buses.
People who are involved in such things. And also people who don't always have the best personal hygiene. So I don't do Greyhound, and that clientele is also spilling over onto Amtrak as well, from what I understand, in some places. And eventually I suspect it will only get worse. So not having public transport and having to spend the money and time driving cars around to meet your basic needs is mildly depressing. I don't mind driving if it's optional, and I want to be driving somewhere different and new, maybe to go on a vacation, but I don't want to be forced into owning a car just to be able to live somewhere that's naturally beautiful and not a city. In Europe, you can essentially catch a bus or a train to almost every part of the continent.
I can confirm this for myself. Being in Fasten in the Netherlands, you're like, what is Fasten? Exactly. It's a small city of around 12,000 people in Gelderland, which is kind of in the east of the Netherlands, northeast part. We were able to take public transit from Fasten. We didn't need a car in Fasten. We could cycle, and if it was too far to cycle, we could get on a bus, which could take us to a train, etc., etc. So there's really no excuse. Again, a big part of the reason why this is the case, aside from the lobbying, is the fact that a lot of American cities, especially the new ones, like to build everything so far apart simply because there's so much extra space. But again, trying to fill that excess space always leads to excess waste.
I'm not going to count Russia in there because I have never been to Russia and I don't know. But within the majority of EU countries, you can get to most villages and towns, and including those non-EU countries, but those in the European Economic Area, you can catch buses or trains to pretty much anywhere, and cities are walkable. In the US, there are places without even sidewalks. Number 10, buying power. In other countries, I seem to get more bang for my buck, so to speak. So that just means that my money went further. For example, in France, In the US, I spend $5 and maybe I'm lucky if I get a latte. Maybe I'm lucky if I get a large latte. It's usually a smaller latte. And for example, in France, I can get a milky coffee or some equivalent, a cafe au lait, milky coffee, whatever. And I could go buy a baguette. And that's €5. So €5 goes a lot further than $5. So that's what I mean by the buying power is much better. Also, I had a lot more money left at the end of the month. This is what we disgustingly call in the US disposable income. I don't believe of disposing of my money. I don't know about you, but I had a lot more money left over at the end of each month from my paychecks.
And that right there, that's something that really shocked me when I visited Europe for the first time as well. My introduction to Europe was Spain. And for me, realizing that Spain was probably 60 to 70% of the cost of living, as in the US, blew my mind because growing up, I always thought Europe was more expensive. I always thought Europe was more expensive and provided an inferior quality of life, but it was literally the exact opposite. The caveat to this is generally Europeans get paid less, but you don't see homeless people in a lot of these places, so clearly they're making it work.
Number 11, and we're almost there. There are 13 total. 11, tipping culture. Tipping culture is out of control in the U.S. When I moved back 10 years ago, I felt that way too. And even though I often worked in the service industry, I still felt like it was out of control. 20% is the expected minimum. And there is a weird sense of entitlement that has been developing around tipping in the US. And that was hard to get used to after living in countries where tipping is not done or tipping is very minimal.
Tipping should be out of the kindness of your heart. It should not be expected. And the more I think about this, the more I realize that restaurant owners in the US who pay their employees below minimum wage on the pretense that their employees will make it up in tips, they are kind of just bad people. They're kind of just bad people if you think about it, because ultimately it is your job, not the customer's job, to pay your employees their money. It's not my job as a customer to ensure that this person can pay their rent. It's my job to pay in proportion to the service I'm receiving. And I also noticed that in barbershops, granted, in barbershops, they don't necessarily make it a moral obligation to tip, but they're always going to ask for a tip in a barbershop. Whereas in the Netherlands, I don't even think I don't want to say it's not accepted, but they never asked. It never seemed like there was even an option to tip. I'm sure if I wanted to give them extra money, they would take it. But to me, seeing how some of these services have increased in cost over time, in my head, that's the tip right there. The tip for my barber, and I've always tipped my barber, by the way. I've always tipped $2 for a haircut in the US, always. Anything beyond that comes from you increasing the price. When I first started going to the barber, and I can say this because I've been going to the same barber shop or getting my hair cut by the same few people in the US since I was around 14 years old. So I've seen the prices jump up from, I want to say $18 when I first started getting cut by them to, I want to say it's 30 to 35 now. 30 to 35. I am not going to increase my tip along with the increase in price. There is no way I'm tipping 20% on a $30 haircut. I'm just not going to do it. If that makes me a bad person, then I guess I'm just a bad person. But at least I'm a bad person who still has my money in my bank account.
For example, like leaving small change in Europe when you go out for coffee and lunch, you just, 10% or just round up to the next euro, whatever it is. And then in other countries like Japan and China and South Korea, where tipping would be a rude gesture. It would actually be an insult. And I asked one of my Korean friends about this, and she said it is like telling that person that they are incapable of making a living on their own and insulting their professionalism, because even though they may be a server in a restaurant, they take their job seriously. So I thought that was really interesting. So having moved back from cultures where tipping is not done in the way that the US does was really hard to get used to. And
I never knew that. I never knew that about those particular cultures, that tipping is an insult. Here in Thailand, that is most certainly not the case. But I guess I could see how, if they view work the way they do, if they take it that seriously, tipping would be seen as a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Not even performative, but almost like you are pitying them. Again, in the US, they are going to make it a moral obligation that you tip them. And you even see this at restaurants where you don't actually sit at the table, where you go to the counter, you order, and they bring you your food. What am I tipping for? But of course, I feel bad for not tipping, so I might tip 10% instead of 20, and then I regret it afterwards because I'm like, well, why did I just do that? What did I just tip for? You just went to the back. You didn't even cook the food yourself. You just delivered the order to the person who's going to make it, and then you just brought it to me. I don't know.
I consider myself to be a generous tipper. I usually do 20%. Very rarely would I tip more than that. But nowadays, people will tell you that, they have those point of sale systems where they turn the screen around to you and they ask you to pick your tip amount. Or they say, oh, it will ask you a few questions. I even caught myself doing that once and I had to stop. It was too much. Sorry, I've got a mosquito here. Number 12, advertising and consumerism. The sheer amount of advertising in the US is out of control. The only place where I felt that it was comparable was living in London in the UK. And after all, that is the hotbed of advertising. It is the home of advertising. It is where advertising was invented.
So I didn't really travel very extensively through London, but I personally felt like London wasn't comparable to the US in terms of advertising, but I'm going to defer to her experience because I'm sure she has more experience than I do. One thing I will say is Thailand is probably on par with the US from an advertising standpoint, but nowhere in Europe that I've been to made me feel like I was being constantly bombarded with marketing like in the US, especially the billboards. Oh my gosh, there are so many billboards advertising so many different things that honestly, I'm surprised that the fatal accident rate isn't higher than it currently is, because it's just insane. It's unsafe.
And I say this even having been in shopping meccas like Singapore and Tokyo and Seoul. The US has advertising unlike anywhere I've ever been. And another thing is that a lot of our ads are dominated by big pharma, and there are so many different drugs that are available that you can't watch anything without learning about a new drug, and that is disconcerting. Now,
That's definitely very true. Growing up, especially when I used to watch cable TV, you would always see those drug commercials where at the end of the commercial, they would have that disclaimer where the person talks at 5 times speed and talks about how common side effects include nausea, vomiting, death, kidney failure, all these different things. And at the same time on the screen, you see this family just happily playing bingo or something. I don't know. It's crazy. It's honestly crazy. And I mean, when you look at the fact that these pharmaceutical companies, they're not really considerate of what's actually going to help people solve their issues. They're focused on providing a fix for the symptoms and creating a reliance on those drugs. It's not really surprising that you see so many advertisements.
on top of this, it's our consumerism. We buy so much, and the amount of waste that this country produces is shocking. For example, in South Korea and in Japan, everything is almost totally recycled. In South Korea, for example, and I don't know if this is like this in all towns and cities, but in Seoul, they had compost bins for our food scraps, and they would usually have one or two per street, and you would go there with your food scrap bin and you would dump it into that community bin, and it would be emptied regularly. And also they would have little bags where you separate your recycling, and your trash was very minimal, at least mine was, and their trash bags are tiny by comparison to the US. So I think that really says a lot about our culture. The fact that we can buy 50-gallon, 55, 60-gallon trash bags. It's like we just throw out so much and we waste so much. And that was really hard to get used to upon moving back to the US. Also, the vast amount of choice. Our level of consumerism is out of control in the sense that we have more choice about everything. And in my experience, life was so much more peaceful not having that level of choice and just having to make do with what's available.
Decision fatigue is a real thing. That's why you always see me wearing either a white t-shirt or a black t-shirt in all of my videos, is because I kind of came to the conclusion that having all of these different options is so overwhelming that it takes away from the things that actually matter. So going to the store and having 50 different options for bread, and all of them are inferior to what you find in Europe, I mean, you're spending all of this mental bandwidth, this psychological energy on something that is very inconsequential in the grand scheme of your life. So that's something that I really came to appreciate about Europe, was that they had fewer options, but the options were better and cheaper. And in the US, even though you have all of those options, more often than not, because humans are creatures of habit, you're going to go with the thing that you're the most familiar with. So you have 50 different brands of bread, but you're going to go with the same bread every single time. So there's no point. I saw so many things in American grocery stores that I just know are never, ever, 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 ever going to sell. Ever. The 80-20 rule. If you're a business owner, focus on the 20% that generates 80% of the revenue. It's better for everyone.
If it weren't necessarily my first choice. And not having so much choice makes life simpler. So moving back to the US, life felt so much more complicated and unnecessarily stressful. It's really hard to resist falling into that trap of having exactly what you want and all that choice. And I'm even speaking about that from a food perspective. So that is something I have to say that I have slowly gotten roped into over the years, having been back in the US for over a decade. Okay, and last but not least, healthcare. Oh my gosh. In the US, the system is set up to be an industry and has little to do with taking care of people. There's an expression that sticks in my mind, and it rang so true when I moved back to the US, and that is that big ag, that's big agriculture, big farming, which is usually monoculture or monocropping. Big ag creates patients for big medicine, so big hospitals, and big hospitals create lifelong customers for big pharma. And so that really rang true when I came home, and it was very hard to adjust to, because most places I have traveled to and lived in are so easy to navigate in terms of healthcare. Now, I know things have declined over the last decade in many countries, and there are long wait lists to get help through the public healthcare systems, but it is still far more affordable than anything an American could ever dream of. So let me give you a couple examples. In Sri Lanka, I got a double ear infection from surfing, and I was there for about 6 weeks. I was riding a motorcycle around with my former significant other, and I got to see a doctor in less than 30 minutes. And lots of people in Sri Lanka speak great English due to their history with the British. And she was absolutely fluent. She was kind. She asked me all the right questions and was able to prescribe exactly what I needed to get me well and healthy again. And that cost me less than $2.50 US. Now, when I lived in South Korea, they have a national healthcare system, which I have to say is quite excellent. They have international hospitals throughout the major cities in their country. Sorry, mosquitoes. And in my paycheck, I would always see a deduction for this national health insurance, which meant that whenever I went to a hospital or if I needed to go to a hospital, it was heavily subsidized, and what I had to pay out of pocket was usually only a small portion of what was necessary, and that was excellent. Another thing, for example,
Americans will hear her say that, and they'll say that the country is stealing her money. No further explanation needed.
I got a severe bout of food poisoning when I lived in Greece, and it had me sick beyond belief. And I was at an international hospital for the majority of a night. It wasn't a full night. I left, right before sunrise, but it was the majority of a night, and they had run so many tests on me, and they had me on IVs and everything. And I walked out of there paying just shy of $270 US, and that is only because I went to the emergency room at an international hospital. If I had just gone to see a regular doctor and this had happened during the day, it would have cost me far less. Now, for those who aren't aware, walking into an emergency room in the US can easily cost you $700, up to $1,500 just by walking through the door. And that's before they even take your blood pressure and treat you, it seems. So getting used to that and knowing that an emergency would cost me a significant amount of money is not exactly a lovely feeling. You feel more at ease when you know that healthcare, and for me, healthcare is more particularly acute care for emergencies that I'm concerned about. And that's it. I take care of myself the best that I can, and I do things naturally. So anyway, those are the 13.
America is a corporation, not a country. Plain and simple. I've never heard anyone break it down the way she broke it down, with the big ag creating customers for big medicine and big medicine creating lifelong customers for big pharma. But just goes to prove my point. And something that she didn't mention was student loans. That's a whole different can of worms. I've talked about that in at least one video. But that's basically my conclusion. I mean, when you really sum it all up, that is the biggest realization that I suspect most Americans have upon returning to the US, is that America is not a country, it's a corporation.